Welcome to Momentum Mind, the place where we unlock the secrets of unstoppable mental strength, personal growth, and peak performance. If you want to push past limits, master your mindset, and turn every challenge into fuel for success, you're in the right place. Today, we're diving deep into a story of resilience and power that will show you exactly how far the human mind can go. Chapter 1: The boy who hid in the shadows. The mornings in that small Indiana house began long before the sun dared to rise. The air was thick with tension, heavier than the smell of oil and metal drifting from the skating rink his father owned. A boy, small for his age, would lie in his bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the footsteps, the ones that always came. His name was David. And before the world would ever know him as the man who conquered pain, he was just a frightened child trying to survive it. When the footsteps came, the boy's muscles tightened. The voice that followed was sharp and angry, always angry. His father, a man with hands like sledgehammers and a temper that cracked the air like thunder, ruled the family with fear. Every command was law, every mistake an invitation for punishment. David would flinch even before the belt struck, not because of the pain itself, but because of the waiting, that unbearable silence between the shout and the hit. The rink was supposed to be their family's pride, a place of music, lights, and laughter. But for David, it was another cage. He worked there every night, long after other kids had gone home to sleep. He wiped down tables, handed out skates, and kept his eyes low, pretending not to hear the fights, the yelling, the humiliation. His mother, strong yet trapped, tried to shield him when she could, but the fear was bigger than either of them. School offered no escape. He was the only black kid in most of his classes, and the stares followed him everywhere. He learned early what it meant to feel invisible and different. Words like stupid, slow, and worse stuck to him like burrs, cutting deeper than bruises ever could. He barely read. Numbers made no sense. Teachers saw a lazy kid, not one who went home to chaos and came back too tired to care. There were moments, rare and fragile, when he'd imagine another life. Sometimes he'd stand in front of the mirror, pulling his small frame straight, pretending to be someone strong, someone unbreakable. He didn't have a name for that person yet, but he felt him inside, quiet and waiting. Then one night, something broke. Not in him, in his mother. The beatings had gone too far. The fear had turned into a hard, cold decision. She packed what she could, grabbed David by the hand, and ran. The world outside was dark, but it was freedom. The rink, the shouting, the belt, all of it disappeared into the distance. For the first time, David breathed without fear of footsteps, but freedom wasn't peace. The quiet that followed was heavy and strange. He missed nothing from that house, yet the echoes stayed with him, in his dreams, in the way he flinched at sudden sounds, in the way he watched people for signs of danger. They started over in a small town, just him and his mother. No more rink, no more beatings, but also no more protection. They were poor now, living check to check. The world outside didn't care about their escape, it just gave them new battles. David tried to fit in, but the past clung to him like a shadow. He struggled at school, his grades sinking. He found ways to hide his shame, pretending to read when he couldn't, nodding when he didn't understand. He wore invisibility like armor. And it worked, until it didn't. One winter morning, he stood before a teacher who looked at his test paper and sighed. "David, what's going on with you?" she asked. The word stung. He wanted to scream that he was trying, that he was fighting ghosts no one could see. But all he did was shrug. It was easier to be the kid who didn't care than the one who tried and failed, but deep down, a quiet anger was growing. It wasn't the wild rage of his father, it was colder, sharper. It whispered that he could be more. That the boy hiding in the shadows wasn't who he had to stay. That night, he lay in bed listening to the hum of the radiator. He thought of all the people who had told him he wasn't enough, too dumb, too weak, too broken. The words replayed over and over until something inside him snapped. He got up, went to the mirror again, and stared at himself. His reflection looked back, scared, tired, but alive. He whispered, "This isn't who I am." The boy in the mirror didn't answer, but for the first time, he didn't look away. The next morning, the world looked the same, cold streets, grey sky, another long day of pretending, but David walked a little differently. The seed of defiance had been planted. It wasn't courage yet, not even close, but it was the beginning of it, and beginnings, no matter how small, have a way of changing everything. That night, as he closed his eyes, he didn't dream of escaping anymore. He dreamed of fighting back, and somewhere deep inside, the version of himself that would one day conquer the impossible, the one who would run through deserts, break bones, and rebuild his soul. Stirred for the first time, the boy was still afraid. But the fear had met its match. Chapter 2: Becoming Invisible. The new town was smaller, quieter, and for a while, David thought that maybe quiet was what safety felt like. The air smelled of cut grass and car oil, and the mornings were pale and still. But peace didn't last long. The other kids could smell difference like wolves. His skin, his voice, the way he carried himself, everything about him stood out in a place where everyone else seemed to match. He learned fast that sometimes survival meant shrinking. So he did. He spoke less. He laughed less. He looked down when people passed him in the hallways. It became a habit, a shield. He built an invisible wall between himself and everyone else, pretending it didn't bother him. But every joke, every whisper, every shove in the hallway carved something into him, something hard, quiet, and lonely. His mother worked double shifts, her hands raw, her smile forced but proud. She believed in him, even when he didn't. Every evening she'd ask about school, and every time he'd say the same thing, "It's fine." The lie slipped out easy now. He'd become good at lying. Lying about how much he understood, lying about how much he read, lying about how much he cared. At school, the tests kept coming, the numbers sinking lower and lower, but David had learned another trick, hiding the truth. When teachers asked him to read aloud, he'd fake a cough or say he forgot his book. When grades came home, he'd intercept the letters before his mother saw them. He thought he was protecting her, but deep down, he was protecting himself from seeing her disappointment. He started wearing hats, hoodies, and baggy clothes, layers of fabric that made him feel safe, unseen. The world couldn't hurt you if it didn't notice you, but invisibility has a price. It's a slow, quiet death. You stop being hurt, but you also stop living. Every day felt the same. Wake up tired, pretend, go home, hide. His reflection grew blurrier in his own mind. He wasn't sure who he was anymore, just a shadow of a boy trying not to be noticed. Then came the Air Force dream. It started like a spark, something small and impossible. He'd seen a flyer once, showing men in blue uniforms standing tall against the sky. They looked untouchable. Free. Strong. It was the opposite of how he felt. He didn't dare tell anyone. It was his secret dream, something fragile and bright he kept hidden behind all the lies, but reality has a way of catching up. His grades weren't good enough. His body was soft, his mind unfocused. He was failing, and the dream seemed to laugh at him from a distance. So he found new ways to escape: TV, junk food, fantasies about a life where he mattered. The years passed like slow rain. Then one afternoon, he stood in front of the bathroom mirror again. He barely recognized the boy staring back. He was heavier now, his eyes dull. The spark was gone. The invisible boy had become invisible even to himself. He thought of his father then, the anger, the control, the cruelty. He'd sworn he'd never be like him, but somehow he'd inherited the same voice. Only his father's rage was loud and external, while David's was quiet and internal, turning inward until it poisoned him. He dropped his gaze and whispered, "You're nothing." It wasn't an insult. It was a truth he'd come to believe, but truth, even the painful kind, can be the start of something new. One morning, on his way to school, he saw a group of men jogging down the street. Their breaths came out in clouds, their bodies moving in rhythm, their faces focused. They weren't running from anything, they were running toward something. Something in him shifted. He watched them until they disappeared over the hill, then kept staring at the empty road. That night, lying in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about them. The rhythm of their feet, the way they didn't stop. It was like they were part of something he didn't understand, something powerful. He began to wonder what it would feel like to be one of them. To move with purpose. To not hide anymore, but wanting change and doing it were two different things. He still failed tests. He still hid behind lies. He still ate his feelings. Change wasn't a lightning bolt, it was a slow burn, and at that point, he didn't know how to light the match until one day, the school announced a test, not for math or reading, but for courage. The physical fitness test. Most kids groaned, but David saw it as a chance, however small, to feel something different. When the day came, he was nervous, heart pounding, sweat already forming before the test even began. The whistle blew, and they started running. Within seconds, he was gasping. His chest burned, legs heavy. Kids passed him easily. He wanted to stop, to fade back into the shadows where he was safe. But something in him, that small, buried voice from years ago, whispered, "Don't stop." So he didn't. He kept running. Not fast, not strong, but steady. He crossed the line long after everyone else, but when he did, he fell to the ground and laughed. It wasn't joy, exactly, it was realization. For the first time, pain had felt clean. It hadn't come from fear or abuse. It had come from effort. An effort, he realized, was something he could control. That night, he looked in the mirror again. Same face, same boy, but this time, something flickered behind the eyes, and not confidence yet. Not even pride. Just a small, stubborn light that refused to go out. The invisible boy had moved an inch toward being seen, and the world was about to notice him, but not in the way he expected, because the next chapter of his life would test him in ways no one could prepare for. It would begin with blood, failure, and a lie so big it would almost destroy him before it set him free. Chapter 3, The Mirror of Lies. The air inside the small apartment felt thick, like even the walls were tired. The television was always on, glowing blue against the empty plates and soda cans scattered around the room. David was older now, heavier, quieter. Life had slowed into something heavy and dull. Each morning looked like the last, the same cheap breakfast, the same tired reflection in the mirror, the same thought he couldn't shake. This can't be it, but it was. He'd finished school with grades so low they barely counted. He drifted from job to job, cleaning, spraying for cockroaches, flipping burgers. Every shift was the same rhythm of noise and silence, work and exhaustion. The world had stopped expecting anything from him, and he stopped expecting anything from himself. He'd grown used to lying, not to others this time, but to himself. He told himself he was fine, that this was just life. That the dreams he once had were childish. But deep down, he knew it was a story he told to survive the truth. He was lost. One night, after a long shift at a pest control company, he came home smelling of chemicals and sweat. He collapsed onto the couch, grabbed the remote, and began flipping channels. The screen flickered through static and noise until it landed on something that made him freeze. A group of men in uniform stood on a beach, shouting in unison. The words Navy SEAL training flashed across the bottom of the screen. The men were covered in mud, soaked to the bone, carrying logs bigger than themselves. Their faces were twisted with pain, but they didn't quit. They didn't even flinch. David sat there, transfixed. Something ancient stirred inside him, that same whisper from long ago, the one that had told him don't stop when he could barely breathe. These men looked like they had mastered that voice. They didn't run from pain, they owned it. He turned off the TV and stared at the black screen. His reflection looked back, soft, tired, broken. He was everything they weren't, and he hated it. That night he couldn't sleep. The image of those men haunted him. Their power, their discipline, their control, it was everything he'd never had. By sunrise, he made a decision. It didn't come with fireworks or music. It was quiet, but absolute. He would become one of them. The next morning, he walked into a Navy recruitment office. The recruiter looked him up and down, the extra weight, the slouched shoulders, and raised an eyebrow. "You want to be a SEAL?" David nodded. The man smirked but handed him a clipboard. "You'll need to take a physical first." A week later, the results came back. The recruiter looked uneasy. "Son," he said, "you're over the weight limit by a long shot. You're too heavy, your numbers are too low. There's no way you'll qualify." David laughed nervously, but inside, shame burned like acid. He thanked the man, took the paper, and walked outside. The cold air hit his face, and for the first time in years, he felt awake. He didn't go home. He went to a drive-thru, ordered his usual comfort meal, and ate it in silence. Each bite tasted like defeat. By the time he threw the bag away, his chest hurt, not from food, but from realization. He'd built his life on lies, little ones that grew like weeds until they wrapped around everything. He lied about trying, lied about caring, lied about being okay. The truth was, he'd given up a long time ago. That night, he stood in front of the mirror again. The glass was foggy, but the man staring back was clear enough. "You're fat," he said out loud. "You're weak. You're nobody." The words hit hard. But instead of turning away, he kept looking. He didn't blink. He let every truth, every ugly, brutal truth, hit him like punches, and then something strange happened. The voice that once broke him started to build him, because once you stop lying to yourself, even pain becomes power. He wiped the fog from the mirror, leaned closer, and whispered, "You've been lying your whole life. But not anymore." The next morning, he woke before dawn. The world outside was still black, the air cold and sharp. He didn't have a plan, just a mission. He filled a jug with water, laced up old sneakers, and started running. Within minutes, his lungs burned. His legs screamed. Every step was agony. He stopped after a few blocks, gasping, hunched over, nearly vomiting. But something in him smiled, not on his lips, but somewhere deep inside. He turned around and walked home. The next day, he did it again. And again. Each time, he went a little farther. Days turned into weeks. He ran until the sun rose, until the pain became familiar, even comforting. He stopped eating junk, started cooking real food, counted every calorie. He cut out excuses like they were poison. The weight began to fall off, slowly, then faster. The mirror changed. The eyes looking back were alive again. He called the recruiter. "I'll be ready," he said. The man on the phone laughed. "You've got 3 months, and you need to lose more than 100 pounds. It's impossible." David didn't argue. He hung up and went back to work, not his job, but the job that mattered now, building himself from the ground up. Every run was a war. Every push-up a battle. Every drop of sweat a step toward redemption. And every night, when he stood in front of the mirror, he didn't lie anymore. He told himself the truth, the brutal, unfiltered truth, and it became his weapon. But the war inside him was only beginning. Because once the body starts to change, the mind fights back even harder, and soon, the voice that used to whisper "don't stop" would scream something far more dangerous: keep going, no matter what it costs. Chapter 4: The war within. The mornings began in darkness. No alarms, no music, just the sound of breath and the soft creak of floorboards as David stepped out of bed. The world outside still slept, but inside that small apartment, a war was already underway. The enemy wasn't a person, it was the whisper in his mind that said, "Stay in bed, it's too hard, you'll never make it." He'd learned to fight it before sunrise. He drank water from an old plastic jug, tied his shoes, and stepped into the cold. The pavement was rough, the air sharp enough to sting his lungs. Every step was punishment, and a promise. At first, he could barely run a mile. His body wasn't built for this, not yet. His knee screamed, his chest tightened, sweat poured into his eyes. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Every day, he pushed farther, ran longer, ignored the pain. Neighbors watched him from their windows, shaking their heads. He looked crazy, a man running through the dark, drenched in sweat, muttering to himself. But he wasn't running from something anymore. He was running toward someone, the man he'd always been too afraid to meet. He stopped listening to music when he ran. No distractions, no comfort. Just his breath and the voice inside him. At first, that voice was cruel, calling him weak, worthless, stupid. But the more he ran, the more it began to change. The insults became fuel. The hate became energy. Each day was a test. He'd come home drenched, muscles trembling, barely able to lift his arms. He'd strip off his soaked clothes, collapse on the bathroom floor, and stare at the ceiling until the spinning stopped. Then he'd crawl to the kitchen, eat oatmeal or chicken breast, and start planning the next day. There was no one cheering for him, no crowd, no applause. Just the sound of his own heartbeat, steady, relentless. Weeks passed. The scale dropped. The mirror changed. His face thinned, his eyes sharpened. His body hardened, his will even more. He was sculpting himself with pain, but the real change wasn't in his muscles. It was in his mind. He began talking to himself differently. When the pain came, he didn't run from it. He faced it, spoke to it. "We're staying here," he'd whisper mid-run, breathless. "You're not breaking me." Every drop of sweat became proof that he could survive his own mind. He called it his calloused mind, just like hands that grow tougher after hard work. His mind was building armor. Every day he suffered on purpose, and every day it hurt less. Not because the pain went away, but because he stopped fearing it. Still, the clock was ticking. He had less than 3 months to lose more weight than most people thought possible. He worked 2 jobs and trained between shifts. When he couldn't afford a gym, he used what he had: push-ups on the kitchen floor, pull-ups from door frames, runs in the dark. He'd weigh himself every morning. Some days, the number wouldn't move. Those were the hardest days, the ones where he'd stare at the scale and feel the old anger rising. The temptation to quit clawed at him, but then he'd remember the rink, his father, the lies, the laughter from people who'd said he'd never be anything. And he'd whisper, "Not today." One night, while running in the rain, his legs gave out. He fell hard, his hands scraping the pavement, blood mixing with water. He stayed there, gasping, the cold cutting into his skin. It would have been easy to quit. No one would have known, but as he lay there, a strange calm washed over him. The rain pounded on his back like a drum. The pain was everywhere, in his lungs, his legs, his chest, but it felt clean. Honest. He pushed himself up slowly, legs shaking, and began to walk. Then jog. Then run again. By the time he got home, he was soaked, bleeding, laughing. He was winning, not against anyone else, against the part of him that had always quit first. Weeks later, he stepped on the scale and blinked. The number had dropped farther than he'd ever imagined possible. He was still heavier than the limit, but the impossible no longer felt out of reach. He called the recruiter again. "I told you I'd make it," he said. The man paused. "You've still got a ways to go," he replied. "But, damn. You're actually doing it." David hung up and stared out the window. The world outside looked the same, quiet, grey, ordinary, but inside, everything had changed. The man who once hid from pain now hunted it. He'd stopped waiting for motivation. He'd learned to act without it. He didn't need permission anymore. Every morning became another chance to break the limits he thought were unbreakable. He was close now, closer than ever, but the body was only half the battle. The other half was about to begin, and it would be darker, harder, and lonelier than anything he'd faced so far, because when you push yourself past your limits, something else starts to push back, and soon, he'd discover that the mind doesn't surrender easily. It fights dirty, using doubt, exhaustion, and pain like weapons. The next test would not be about running or lifting or weight loss. It would be about survival, inside his own head. And one cold morning, when everything in him said to stop, he would make a choice that would change the rest of his life. A choice that would take him to the edge of death, and beyond it. Chapter 5, The Edge of Death. The sun was barely awake when David arrived at the training base. The air smelled of salt and metal, and the sound of the ocean crashed in the distance like a warning. The other men stood in tight lines, tall, lean, confident. He could see the difference right away. They looked carved from stone, while he still carried the ghost of the man he used to be. The instructors didn't waste a second. Their voices were like thunder, sharp and unrelenting. The air shook with commands. "Get down! Push-ups! Faster!" Sand filled his mouth, his nose, his ears. The ground was cold and rough beneath his hands, but he didn't slow. The first hours blurred together, running, crawling, carrying heavy logs with strangers who'd soon become brothers. Every muscle screamed. Sweat burned his eyes. The ocean water soaked his clothes, the wind turned it to ice against his skin, and through it all, the instructors shouted the same words over and over: "You don't belong here." He almost believed them. Almost, but deep inside, something stronger pushed back, that stubborn, quiet fire that had carried him from the couch to this moment. He whispered to himself, "Don't you dare quit." By nightfall, bodies started to drop out. Some men limped away in silence, others cried or screamed. The instructors didn't stop. The training ground was a battlefield, not of bullets and blood, but of willpower and pain. Then came hell week. 5 days. No sleep. Endless cold, hunger, exhaustion. It began before dawn with the sound of a whistle that felt like the start of war. They ran to the ocean, dove into freezing water, then rolled in sand until their skin turned raw. They carried boats on their heads until their necks burned. They lifted logs until their arms shook uncontrollably. At one point, the instructors ordered them into the surf zone, shoulder deep in icy water, waves slamming against their faces. "Lock arms," they shouted. "Stay together." David's teeth chattered uncontrollably. The water felt like knives cutting into his flesh. His vision blurred. The sky spun. All around him, men were shivering, some whispering prayers. He wanted to quit. His body begged him to. The thought of warmth, of sleep, of peace, it was tempting beyond words. But then he looked to his left. A man beside him was sobbing quietly, whispering, "I can't do this." David turned to him, voice low and calm despite the chaos. "We're not leaving," he said. The man looked at him, eyes wide with pain. But something in David's tone, steady, unbroken, made him stop crying. They stayed in the water until dawn. By the time the instructors pulled them out, half the group was gone. Every step after that felt like walking on broken glass. His feet bled through his boots. His shoulders were blistered raw. He was hallucinating now, seeing shapes in the sand, hearing voices that weren't real, but he kept moving, because somewhere in the blur of pain, something changed. He stopped feeling sorry for himself. He stopped waiting for it to end. He started owning the suffering. Every time his mind said, "I can't," he answered, "Then we'll find out." When the instructors yelled in his face, he smiled. When the cold water hit him, he whispered, "I'm still here." The pain didn't go away, it just stopped mattering. By the fourth night, he was running on pure instinct. His body was broken, but his spirit had become untouchable. He had crossed the line where most people stop, the line between exhaustion and transformation. He realized something powerful in that darkness: pain doesn't end. You just get stronger than it. On the 5th day, the sun rose over the ocean, painting the waves gold. The instructors blew the whistle one last time. Hell week was over. Men staggered, collapsed, cried, hugged each other. David didn't cry. He just stood there, shaking, staring at the horizon. His lips were cracked, his body destroyed, but inside, there was silence, not emptiness, but peace. He had gone to the edge of death and come back with something unbreakable. He wasn't the same man who'd walked into that camp. He wasn't the scared boy hiding in shadows or the overweight man on the couch. He had killed that version of himself somewhere in the freezing ocean, and from its ashes, a new one had emerged, forged in pain, hardened by suffering, and made of something stronger than flesh. But the world wasn't done testing him, because sometimes, the body can survive what the mind can't, and soon, his body, the very thing he'd rebuilt with fire and will, would begin to break in ways that even his mind couldn't ignore. He didn't know it yet, but his next battle wouldn't be fought in training grounds or oceans. It would be fought inside his own chest, against his own heartbeat, and this time, no amount of toughness could protect him. Chapter 6, The Breaking Point. The days after Hell Week felt like walking in another man's body. David's skin was sunburned and torn, his muscles carved thin from exhaustion, but his mind was sharper than ever. Every sound, every smell, every detail of the world felt alive, like he'd been reborn. He had survived the storm. But storms have a way of returning. The Navy became his new home. The rhythm of discipline, early mornings, drills, missions, filled his days. He rose before dawn, ran before others woke, and pushed harder than anyone else. To the men around him, he was no longer the underdog. He was the machine, the one who never stopped, never showed weakness, never complained. But machines break too. It started as a whisper. A dull ache in his knees after long runs. A pulse of pain in his back. He ignored it. Pain was his old companion, it meant he was still alive. When the doctors warned him to slow down, he laughed. Pain is part of it, he said. You just push through. And he did. For years, but the pain grew teeth. It bit deeper each time he ran. It moved from his knees to his hips, then up his spine. He began to feel like there was gravel in his joints, like something inside him was grinding itself to dust. Still, he refused to stop. During missions, when the others slept, he'd train in silence. Pull-ups, push-ups, long runs in the night. He told himself that rest was weakness, that only soft men took breaks. The harder he pushed, the more he felt invincible, until one morning, his body finally decided it had had enough. He woke to a sharp, tearing pain in his legs. It was so intense that he couldn't stand. When he tried, the room spun, and he collapsed to the floor. Sweat poured from his face. His breath came short, ragged. He tried again, gripping the edge of the bed, forcing himself upright. The pain exploded. He had broken something, deep inside. At the hospital, the doctors stared at his scans in disbelief. His body was covered in stress fractures. His bones looked like cracked glass. His heart, they said, was under enormous strain. His blood pressure was dangerously high. Your body's shutting down, one doctor said quietly. If you keep pushing like this, you could die. David listened, silent. The words echoed in his head, but they didn't sound real. He had survived Hell Week, abuse, poverty, everything. How could his own body betray him now? But denial doesn't heal broken bones. He was grounded. No missions. No training. Just rest. For the first time in years, he was forced to stop, and that was worse than any physical pain. The silence that filled his days was deafening. Without movement, without struggle, his mind turned on him. He sat in his small apartment staring at the floor, surrounded by trophies and medals that suddenly felt meaningless. He had built his entire identity on being unbreakable. Now he was broken. The whispers began again, old voices from the past. You're weak. You're done. You were never good enough. He tried to fight them, but without the comfort of pain, without the armor of exhaustion, they grew louder. Days turned into weeks. He stopped answering calls. He avoided mirrors. The world outside kept moving, and he felt himself fading again, becoming invisible like the boy he once was. One night, unable to sleep, he limped into the bathroom and turned on the light. The man in the mirror stared back, older, tired, eyes sunken. His reflection looked like a stranger. Who are you without the pain? He whispered. No answer came. He sank to the floor, his back against the wall, and for the first time in years, he cried. Not from fear or sadness, but from confusion. He had thought pain was his enemy. Then he made it his weapon. Now, without it, he felt empty, lost between who he'd been and who he wanted to become. But somewhere in that silence, another thought surfaced. What if this wasn't the end? What if this was the next test, the one he couldn't fight with muscles or speed? The next morning, he woke with a new idea. If his body couldn't move, then he'd train his mind. Not by running or lifting, but by mastering silence. He began to study, reading about endurance, discipline, psychology. He filled notebooks with thoughts about fear and willpower. He looked back at every painful moment in his life and asked himself what it had taught him. Slowly, his body healed. The pain didn't vanish, but he learned to live with it, to respect it instead of hating it. He started running again, not as fast, not as far, but with more purpose. Each step wasn't about defiance anymore, it was about control. He realized that real strength wasn't about ignoring pain. It was about mastering it, knowing exactly how far you could go before breaking, and then learning how to rebuild. But rebuilding takes time, and time, as he was about to learn, has a way of throwing new challenges when you least expect them, because just when he thought he'd found balance, life would shatter it again, this time, not with pain, but with something far heavier, loss. A kind of loss no physical training could prepare him for. And it would test not his body, not his discipline, but his heart. Chapter 7, The Weight of Loss. The world outside looked calm, blue skies, sunlight on the water, laughter from somewhere in the distance, but inside, David felt nothing. Just a heavy, hollow silence. He had faced exhaustion, humiliation, and pain, but nothing like this. This was different. This was the kind of pain that didn't scream. It whispered. It started with a phone call. A voice on the other end, quiet, trembling, carrying words that made the air go cold. A friend. A brother in arms. Gone. The details blurred, an accident, a mission gone wrong, a life ended in a moment. David listened, unable to speak. The world around him seemed to shrink until all he could hear was the faint buzz of the phone line and the beating of his own heart. He hung up and sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. His body didn't move. His mind replayed the voice, the words, over and over until they lost their shape and became a dull hum. Death wasn't new to him, he'd seen it before, up close. But this one hit differently. This one carried memories of laughter, sweat, shared pain. They trained together, suffered together. And now, one of them was gone, and he wasn't. Survivor's guilt is a strange kind of ghost. It doesn't haunt you all at once. It lingers, patient, waiting for quiet moments to whisper, "Why him? Why not you?" He tried to outrun it. He trained harder, ran longer, lifted heavier. He pushed until his body screamed, hoping the pain would drown the thoughts. But no matter how fast he ran, grief ran faster. At night, he'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, hearing his friend's voice in the dark. Sometimes he imagined him sitting there, grinning, calling him weak for crying. Other times, he imagined nothing, just silence, empty and endless. Days turned into weeks. He stopped talking to people, avoided laughter, avoided comfort. He didn't know how to heal from something that couldn't be fixed with willpower. Then, one evening, as the sun sank into the horizon, he went for a long run. No headphones. No plan. Just the sound of his feet against the ground. The wind brushed against his face, the air thick with heat. He ran through the streets, through the noise, through the ache in his legs. He didn't stop until his lungs burned and his vision blurred. Then he looked up and realized where he was, the edge of a lake, perfectly still, the surface glowing gold with the last light of the day. He stood there, breathless, staring at his reflection in the water. The ripples distorted his face, but behind the blur, he saw something raw and human, not the warrior, not the machine, not the unbreakable man he tried to be. Just a man. He whispered into the wind, "I miss you." The words felt strange, heavy, but freeing. He stayed there until the sky went dark. When he finally turned to leave, something inside him had shifted. He realized that pain, even this kind, wasn't an enemy. It was a reminder. Proof that he could feel deeply, that he could love deeply. He began writing again, not reports or goals, but letters. Letters to his friend, to himself, to the people he'd lost. Sometimes they were angry, sometimes soft. Sometimes they were just silence on paper. Each letter became a kind of release. Each word a breath. He carried that grief with him into his training, into his days. It didn't go away, but it stopped being a weight that crushed him. It became part of him, a scar, not a wound, and slowly, he began to understand something he'd missed all along. Pain wasn't just a tool for growth. It was a bridge, a way to connect, to understand others, to stay human. He started talking again. To new recruits, to old friends, to strangers. He told them the truth, that strength wasn't the absence of emotion, but the courage to face it. He spoke about his friend, not as a tragedy, but as a lesson, a reminder that life is fragile, that time is limited, and that every breath is borrowed. But as the grief softened, another feeling began to rise beneath it, restlessness. He'd spent years proving he could endure anything. Now he wanted to know what came after survival. What did it mean to live? He didn't have the answer yet. But he could feel the question pulling him forward, the same way pain once had, and soon, that question would lead him down a new path, one far from the Navy, far from the battlefield. It would take him back into the world, where comfort ruled and excuses were everywhere. A place where no one screamed orders, where no one forced him to push, where the only enemy was complacency. And there, in that quiet, ordinary world, David would find his hardest fight yet, not against pain but against comfort. Chapter 8: The Comfort Trap. When David left the military, the world felt soft. The air itself seemed slower, heavier, filled with noises that didn't matter, phones ringing, people laughing too loud, cars humming past. No gunfire, no orders, no reason to wake up before dawn. For the first time in his adult life, he had nothing to fight. At first, it felt like peace. He slept longer, ate what he wanted, watched TV late into the night. People told him he'd earned it, that it was time to relax, to enjoy life. But comfort, to a man who had lived on the edge of pain, felt like quicksand. Each day he sank a little deeper. The fire that once pushed him began to fade. His runs became shorter. His workouts, slower. He told himself he'd train tomorrow. Then tomorrow became another tomorrow. He started gaining weight. His knees ached again, not from training, but from sitting too much. The mirror that once reflected a soldier now showed someone softer, slower, dulled by ease. He didn't recognize the man staring back, and with the weight came something darker, the old voices. The ones from his childhood. You're lazy. You're weak. You're nothing without struggle. He tried to ignore them, but they crept in between every quiet moment. One evening, after another day of doing nothing meaningful, he sat in his car outside a fast food restaurant. The bag beside him was greasy and half-eaten. The dashboard light cast a dull glow across his face. He stared at his reflection in the windshield, the tired eyes, the rounder face, and felt disgust crawl through him. What happened to you? He muttered. His hand trembled slightly as he gripped the steering wheel. He could almost feel the ghosts of his past, the drill instructors, the pain, the storms, watching him from somewhere unseen. He'd spent years mastering suffering. But no one had taught him how to master comfort. He drove home in silence. The streets were empty, the sky thick with clouds. When he parked, he didn't get out immediately. He just sat there, heart heavy, breath shallow. Then something in him snapped. He went inside, threw the bag of food into the trash, and walked to the mirror. You've been here before, he told himself. You know what to do. That night, he wrote down a challenge, not for anyone else, but for himself. A list of impossible things. He would run long distances again. Lose every pound he'd gained. Push until his body remembered who he was, and so, before the sun rose, he stepped out into the cold air and began to run. The first few minutes were agony. His lungs burned. His legs screamed. His breath came in broken gasps. He wanted to quit after every step. But beneath the pain, there was something familiar, something alive. The rhythm of his feet against the ground felt like an old song he'd forgotten. By the time he reached the corner of the street, sweat poured down his face, his body shaking. But for the first time in months, his heart was awake. He ran again the next morning. And the next. The body resisted, but the mind had made its choice. He wouldn't fall back into comfort. He began building new rules for himself, a structure without a commander, a war without a battlefield. He started waking before dawn again, running miles before the city opened its eyes. He filled his apartment with sticky notes, reminders, goals, insults meant to provoke him. Don't be soft. Don't forget who you are. Slowly, the softness began to burn away. His body hardened. His breathing steadied. But more importantly, his mind sharpened again. He realized that comfort was more dangerous than pain because it disguised itself as peace. It whispered, "You've done enough." It told you to rest, to enjoy, to stop growing. And most people listened. They didn't even notice they were dying slowly, not physically, but mentally. David refused to be one of them. He began testing himself with extreme goals. Not to prove anything to others, but to keep the fire alive. He signed up for ultramarathons, races so long and brutal they broke most men before the halfway mark. He hadn't trained for distance running. He wasn't built for it. But that was exactly why he chose it. On his first race, his body nearly gave out. His feet bled, his legs locked, his stomach twisted in knots. People around him dropped out, limping, crying. But he refused to stop. He dragged himself forward, mile after mile, until the finish line came into view, a blur of sound, light, and disbelief. When he crossed it, he didn't feel pride. He felt clarity. He had rediscovered what made him feel alive. The suffering wasn't punishment, it was connection. To effort. To meaning. to life itself. He began chasing that feeling wherever he could find it, in long runs, in cold mornings, in the stillness before dawn when the world slept and he alone was awake and people started to notice. Runners, soldiers, strangers, they saw what he was doing and wanted to know how. How he pushed past pain, how he turned struggle into strength. He told them the truth: you don't rise to the level of your potential. You fall to the level of your training. Every day you skip, every excuse you make, you're digging your own grave, one comfort at a time. His words spread, but not everyone understood. Some called him obsessed, broken, even insane. But David didn't care. He knew what they couldn't see, that the real enemy wasn't exhaustion, or fear, or pain. It was ease, and he was done letting it win. Still, deep down, he sensed there was more. More he could do. More he could become. The races, the pain, the victories, they were pieces of something bigger, something waiting beyond the horizon. He didn't know it yet, but the next challenge wouldn't just test his body or mind. It would test everything he believed about what was possible, and this time, the whole world would be watching. Chapter 9, The Race That Changed Everything. The desert stretched out like an endless sheet of fire. The horizon shimmered, and the air itself seemed to burn. David stood at the starting line, surrounded by men and women carved from iron and madness, runners who had spent their lives chasing pain across the edges of the earth. He looked down at his shoes, old and worn. His gear was simple, almost careless. Around him, others had state-of-the-art hydration packs, sleek sunglasses, perfect nutrition plans. He had water, a few snacks, and a heart that refused to quit. The race was called the Badwater, a monster of a run through one of the hottest places on the planet. No mercy. No shade. Just sun, wind, and pain. People whispered about it like a myth. It wasn't just a race, it was a test of existence. Only the toughest made it to the end. Most didn't. When the starting horn blew, the runners surged forward, their feet striking the earth like war drums. David moved with them, steady, silent. The heat wrapped around him, heavy and alive. Each breath tasted like fire. At first, it felt good, that familiar rhythm of motion, the thud of heart and muscle working in unison. But the desert doesn't care about pride. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. The road seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon, each mile heavier than the last. Sweat poured from his body, drying instantly in the scorching wind. His lips cracked, his skin blistered. His legs felt like stone. By the time he reached the halfway mark, the pain was everywhere, in his feet, his back, his lungs. The road shimmered in the distance like a mirage. He could see other runners ahead, some slowing, some stopping, some collapsing into the dust. Every instinct screamed at him to quit. His mind whispered, "You've done enough," but that voice, the voice of comfort, was one he knew too well. He gritted his teeth and kept moving. As the hours bled together, his body began to break. His feet swelled, his shoes cut into his skin, and blood began to seep through the fabric. His stomach twisted violently. Every step sent a shockwave of agony up his legs. At one point, he had to stop. He bent over, hands on his knees, his vision flickering black at the edges. The medical team nearby glanced at him nervously. "Sir, you're dehydrated," one said. "You need to stop." He looked up slowly, eyes hard. "Not yet." He stumbled forward again. Each step became a battle. The ground blurred beneath him. He stopped seeing miles, he saw moments. One breath, one step, one heartbeat at a time. His body had long since given up, but something else had taken over, that quiet, furious voice deep inside, the one that had carried him through abuse, through hell week, through every storm life had thrown his way. You don't stop when you're tired. You stop when you're done. The sun dipped behind the mountains, and night fell. The air cooled, but his pain didn't. His body was shaking, his clothes soaked in salt and blood. Every part of him screamed to quit, but his mind was now somewhere else, a place beyond reason, beyond the limits of flesh. He wasn't running anymore. He was surviving. In those dark hours, memories came like ghosts. The boy hiding from his father's rage. The teenager cleaning maggot-filled kitchens. The recruit crawling through mud. The man crying alone on a bathroom floor. All of them were still inside him, running with him, carrying him. By the time dawn began to rise, he was barely moving. His legs dragged, his arms hung limp, his breath came in shallow bursts. But he could see it now, the finish line in the distance, and something broke open inside him, not pain. Not exhaustion. Something purer, a flood of emotion, raw and overwhelming. Every hardship, every scar, every failure, all of it had led to this moment. The world had tried to crush him, and still he was here. When he finally crossed the finish line, there were no cheers, no fanfare. Just the quiet sound of footsteps ending and a long exhale that felt like it came from his soul. He collapsed to his knees, hands pressed to the hot ground. Tears mixed with dust on his face. He wasn't crying from pain. He was crying because he'd finally understood the limits people talk about, they aren't real. The body breaks long before the mind does, and most people never even come close to the edge. He had reached that edge, looked over it, and stepped through later. When reporters asked him why he did it, why he would risk his health, his life, his sanity for a race, he smiled faintly. Because I wanted to see what was left, he said. When there's nothing left to give, what's still there? That's who you really are. He didn't win the race. He didn't need to. He had found something more valuable than victory, proof. Proof that every wall in the mind is built by fear, and every excuse is just another form of surrender. The world began to notice him then. His story spread, the man who ran through pain, who conquered suffering. People started calling him superhuman, but David knew better. He wasn't superhuman. He was just someone who refused to quit when others did. Someone who understood that the only way to grow was to keep walking into the fire, and though the world was celebrating him, deep down he knew this wasn't the end, because he could feel it again, that restlessness. That hunger. He had gone beyond pain and fear. Now he wanted to master something even harder, the mind itself. Chapter 10, Master of the Mind. The desert, the blood, the exhaustion, all of it had taught David one thing: the body could only take you so far. Beyond that, it was the mind that decided what was possible. And he knew now that the final frontier wasn't a race, a push-up, or a mile, it was inside his own skull. He began training the mind like he had trained his body. Every day, he sat in silence, letting thoughts wash over him like waves. He didn't chase them, didn't fight them. He watched them, every doubt, every fear, every fragment of anger. And slowly, he learned to control them. Pain no longer startled him. Hunger no longer distracted him. Fear didn't whisper in the dark, it waited politely, ignored. He developed a ritual. Each morning, he woke before dawn, meditated, and visualized the impossible. He imagined himself running when his body screamed to stop. He pictured lifting weights that felt unmovable. He imagined standing in front of every fear he'd ever had, and not flinching. He realized the mind could be stronger than the body if trained correctly. And the only way to train it was with extremes. He set new challenges. Ultra-distant races became warm-ups. He began testing sleep deprivation, fasting, and extreme heat. Every trial was a lesson, each failure a teacher. He wrote in journals about pain, endurance, fear, and what it felt like to stare at the edge of collapse and keep moving. The hardest part wasn't suffering. It was confronting himself. The old boy hiding in fear. The teenager hiding from abuse. The man who had once quit on comfort. He had to face every lie he'd told himself, every weakness he'd hidden, and every excuse he'd ever made. And then he realized, mastery wasn't about avoiding weakness. It was about embracing it, understanding it, and turning it into fuel. One morning, after a night spent running until his legs refused to move, he stopped at a cliff overlooking the ocean. The waves crashed violently against the rocks below. The wind tore at his clothes, his hair, his skin. He closed his eyes and let the storm of sound, cold, and motion fill him. For the first time, he felt completely present. No past, no future, no excuses. Just him, the boy who had been invisible, the man who had faced death, the warrior who had endured everything the world threw at him. He opened his eyes. The horizon stretched endlessly and he smiled, because he had learned the ultimate truth: the mind is limitless. He could go farther, push harder, endure longer than any body or circumstance could contain. The mind decides whether the body is weak or unbreakable. The mind decides whether pain is defeat or power. From that day, he carried that understanding like a weapon. Every hardship, physical, emotional, or mental, became a tool, a test, a step toward growth. He began speaking to others, sharing the secrets of mental mastery. People asked him how he ran ultramarathons, how he endured hell week, how he overcame pain. I don't run because it's easy, he would say. I run because it hurts. I endure because the mind is stronger than any wall you'll face. You learn to control the chaos inside, and then nothing outside can stop you. But mastery wasn't just about control. It was about constant challenge. Even after conquering the desert, the body, and fear, he knew the mind could always go further. So he kept pushing. Every day, every mile, every struggle. Every time he thought he had reached his limit, he tested it again, proving to himself that limits were lies. Yet even as he conquered the mind, he knew the world would always test him. Pain would return. Failure would stalk him. Comfort would try to claim him again and he would have to face them all, but now he wasn't afraid because he had learned the most powerful lesson of all: the mind is not just a part of you, it is the forge where the unbreakable is made. And David Goggins was not finished yet. Chapter 11. Beyond human limits. David had learned to master the mind, but mastery alone was not enough. The edge he craved, the fire that fueled him, demanded more. Not just control, but absolute confrontation with exhaustion, with fear, with the human body's breaking point. He began seeking challenges no one else would touch, challenges that tested both flesh and mind until they blurred into one. He entered races that seemed impossible. One was a 100-mile ultramarathon through mountains so steep and jagged it felt like the earth itself was trying to crush him. Another was a triathlon that combined heat, distance, and water that froze his bones. And in every challenge, the rules of comfort were stripped away. Every step, every stroke, every pedal brought him closer to collapse. Pain became a companion, not an enemy. When his muscles screamed, he learned to whisper to them, "We've been here before. We can endure." When his lungs burned, he forced the fire into his chest and let it sharpen his focus. And when sleep wanted to take him, he refused, running, swimming, cycling until every cell screamed, but his mind smiled. Other competitors fell around him, some screaming in agony, others weeping with defeat. David passed them, not with speed or talent, but with the steady, unrelenting rhythm of someone who refused to quit. He moved like a force of nature, unstoppable, unbreakable, unyielding. In the desert of one race, the sun turned the sand to glass beneath his feet. His shoes tore, his feet blistered, blood dripping with every step. His body begged him to stop. His mind whispered excuses. But he didn't stop. He leaned into the pain, letting it flow through him like electricity, a reminder of life, of strength, of endurance. When the finish line appeared, miles away, it was almost surreal. He was hallucinating. The air shimmered. Shadows danced on the sand. His legs trembled so violently he had to crawl the last few feet. And yet, when he crossed, he didn't collapse. He didn't celebrate. He simply exhaled, letting the enormity of the moment sink in. It wasn't victory that drove him. It was the test itself, the confrontation with human limitation. He had learned that the mind could push the body farther than it wanted to go. That fear, exhaustion, and pain were only obstacles for those who listened to them. That every limit was self-imposed, waiting for someone stubborn enough to ignore it. He kept pushing, and the challenges grew. Cold water swims that turned his blood to ice. Races in scorching sun where heat stroke was inevitable. Endless pull-ups until his hands tore and bled. And in every test, he documented, reflected, and learned. Each scar was proof, each moment of collapse a lesson the world began to notice. Magazines, news crews, social media, people called him superhuman, impossible, a machine. But David knew better. He wasn't superhuman. He was human, painfully, vulnerably human, who had simply refused to accept the limits most people obeyed without question. He began speaking to others, sharing the methods of enduring more than what they thought possible. He taught them to embrace suffering, to lean into discomfort, to confront their excuses head-on. And while some listened, others mocked him. But he never stopped because each race, each trial, each moment of unimaginable struggle reminded him of something essential: life is a battlefield. Every day, the mind tells you to stop, the body begs for ease, the world tempts you with comfort. But the moment you push past it, that moment is yours forever. And even as he conquered feats beyond imagination, he knew there was a deeper truth waiting. Strength, endurance, and mental toughness were only the beginning. True mastery required more: a relentless pursuit of self, a confrontation with every weakness, a willingness to look inside and never flinch. David had already defied poverty, abuse, obesity, fear, and pain. He had stared into death and exhaustion and returned with fire in his veins. But the greatest challenge was still ahead, not in deserts, oceans, or mountains, but in the ordinary, unglamorous world where no one watched and excuses lurked around every corner, because the ultimate enemy isn't pain, fear, or exhaustion. It is mediocrity, and David had decided that mediocrity would never claim him. Chapter 12. The unbreakable life. The mornings were quiet now, but not empty. The streets were still, the sun a gentle glow over the city, but inside David, the fire still burned, steady, alive, unrelenting. He had conquered deserts, oceans, mountains, and even his own mind. But life, he realized, was not a race, a climb, or a test of endurance alone. Life was the battlefield that never let you rest. He woke early, as always, the cold air biting his skin. The body was stronger than ever, lean and disciplined, yet it was nothing without the mind that had learned to rule it. He ran through the streets, not to prove anything to anyone else, but to remind himself what it meant to be alive, fully, relentlessly, without apology. The world beyond his training grounds was different. There were no instructors screaming orders, no finish lines marked in sand or blood, no time limits for failure. There was only choice. And that, he realized, was harder than anything he had faced. Every day, he applied the principles he had mastered. Discipline, endurance, and mental toughness were no longer tools to survive, they were tools to live. He attacked his work, his relationships, his goals, with the same ferocity that had carried him through Hell Week, bad water, and countless ultramarathons. When obstacles appeared, setbacks, doubts, failures, he faced them as he had always faced pain, head on. Not with fear, not with hesitation, but with relentless persistence. He knew that life would never stop testing him. The world doesn't pause for anyone. But he had learned how to bend circumstances to his will by bending himself first. He began teaching others, but not just with words. He lived the lessons he preached. People watched him run when the world slept, endure when the world quit, and overcome when the world had given up. He became a mirror for what was possible, showing that greatness is not born, it is forged. Even in quiet moments, he practiced mastery. The mundane became a battlefield, waking early, saying no to comfort, confronting excuses, pushing limits in every aspect of life. Every meal, every conversation, every choice was an opportunity to test the unbreakable mind, and yet, for all his strength, he remained human. He cried when it mattered. He grieved when it came. He loved fiercely. He understood that the unbreakable life was not the absence of vulnerability, but the courage to embrace it while continuing forward. The city around him moved fast, filled with people chasing comfort, distractions, and excuses. But David moved differently. He carried purpose in every step. He carried fire in every thought. And in every struggle, he reminded himself, and those around him, that the only limits that mattered were the ones you accepted. Sometimes, at night, he stood at the edge of a quiet lake, staring at the reflection of a man who had been beaten, broken, abandoned, and tested beyond reason. And he smiled. Because the reflection staring back was proof, the impossible can be done. Pain can be mastered. Fear can be conquered. Limits can be shattered. He had built himself into something rare, unbreakable, not because life had been easy, but because he had chosen to walk into every storm, to face every fear, to endure every trial. He had turned suffering into power, weakness into fuel, and every I can't into a challenge, and he knew, in that quiet moment, that this wasn't the end. Life would continue to test him, to push him, to tempt him with comfort and distraction. But he had learned the ultimate lesson: the fire that had carried him through every hardship was not in the desert, the mountains, or the water, it was in him, the fire that could never be extinguished. And as the night settled, the stars reflecting off the still water, David understood something simple, yet infinite: you are defined not by what happens to you, but by what you refuse to allow to break you, and he would never be broken. The unbreakable life wasn't a destination. It was a choice, and he had chosen it, every single day, for the rest of his life. If you enjoyed this journey and want to keep building your mental edge, let me know in the comments which audiobook or story you'd like us to explore next. And don't forget, hit that like button, subscribe, and join the Momentum Mind community, where every day is a chance to grow stronger, push harder, and unlock your full potential.